The push for gender equality in tech has gone too far, so say some men. Or more accurately, so says Nellie Bowles of the New York Times. I wonder if Ms. Bowles tried to find any women that agreed. How about Deborah So, a PhD in sexual neuroscience, who wrote of James Damore's memo? As a woman who's worked in academia and within STEM, I didn't find the memo offensive or sexist in the least. I found it to be a well-thought-out document asking for greater tolerance for differences in opinion and treating people as individuals instead of based on group membership. Within the field of neuroscience, sex differences between men and women when it comes to brain structure and function and associated differences in personality and occupational preferences are understood to be true because the evidence for them, thousands of studies, is strong. This is not information that's considered controversial or up for debate. If you tried to argue otherwise or for purely social influences, you'd be laughed at. Then the subtitle. After revelations of harassment and bias in Silicon Valley, a backlash is growing against the women in tech movement. You see what she did there? She tried to link the pushback against gender diversity in tech about retaliation for revelations of harassment and bias. However, that link doesn't exist anywhere except presumably in the mind of Nellie Bowles. It certainly isn't demonstrated in the article. James Damore's photo features alongside the headline. Does anyone think James Damore wrote his now infamous memo because of revelations of harassment? Anyone who's actually read the memo, that is. But this is how the author dealt with Damore's memo in the article. But those who privately thought things had gone too far were given a voice by James Damore, 28, a soft-spoken Google engineer. Mr. Damore, frustrated with another diversity training, wrote a memo that he posted to an internal Google message board. In it, he argued that maybe women were not equally represented in tech because they were biologically less capable of engineering. Google fired him last month. Really? Does that encapsulate Damore's memo? Is that what it boiled down to, or was it about actual scientifically well-established differences between men and women? She does mention a few prominent men in tech that backed the science in Damore's memo. Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, startup investor John Durant, and Peter Thiel's business partner Eric Weinstein. But it's all in service of the larger narrative, which is that it galvanized those evil men's rights advocates, which is supported by quotes from Paul Elam and Warren Farrell. But let's go back to the beginning of the article. Their complaints flow on Reddit forums, on video game message boards, on private Facebook pages and across Twitter. They argue for everything from male separatism to an end to gender diversity efforts. Silicon Valley has for years accommodated a fringe element of men who say women are ruining the tech world. Is that what they're saying, or is it that gender diversity programs are misguided, as James Damore has said? Is this a reference to Gamergate? Could you provide some direct evidence instead of this vaguely worded conspiracy theory? Now, as the nation's technology capital, long identified as one of the more hostile work environments for women, is it? By what metric is it one of the more hostile work environments for women? Any data, or is this just truth by assertion? Reels from a series of high-profile sexual harassment and discrimination scandals, these conversations are gaining broader traction. And she provides a link to another article that details women sharing their stories of sexual harassment in the technology startup industry. So again, the time-tested method of anecdotes and narratives over data. I don't doubt sexual harassment happens, but is there any evidence that it's more prevalent in tech than anywhere else? And this isn't about sexual harassment by some grunt in the cubicle next to you. These are high-profile CEOs like Travis Kalanick of Uber or heads of venture capital firms. The author quotes a James Altizer, an engineer chipmaker at NVIDIA, who says, "It's a witch hunt," he said in a phone interview, contending men are being fired by dangerous human resources departments. Really? Is that what he said? Because the words you put quotes around don't say that at all. Did he provide evidence of this other than James Damore? Did you even ask him? I'm sitting in a soundproof booth right now because I'm afraid someone will hear me. When you're discussing gender issues, it's almost religious. The response, it's almost zealotry. Well, that's a bit weird because you are now knowingly being quoted in the New York Times as saying it. So I don't think a soundproof booth is going to help much. And then we learn that Mr. Altizer is part of a backlash against the women in technology movement. While many in the tech industry had previously dismissed the fringe men's rights arguments, some investors, executives and engineers are now listening. Fringe men's rights arguments. This is consistent the whole way through the article. The guys are kooks, they're men's rights activists. code for women haters. Let's not discuss whether they have a point, whether there are actual valid reasons why there are less women in tech. Easier just to discredit them with labels. Those studies and surveys show there is no denying the travails women face in the male-dominated industry. Some said that the line for what counted as harassment had become too easy to cross, and that the push for gender parity was too extreme a goal. Few were willing to talk openly about their thinking for fear of standing out in largely progressive Silicon Valley. And could you cite some of those surveys and articles, or is that just received wisdom we're all supposed to accept? Even so, witch hunt is the new whispered meme. Some in tech have started identifying as contrarians to indicate subtly that they do not follow the diversity dogma, and self-described men's rights activists in Silicon Valley said their numbers at meetings were rising. Well, the real tragedy is that it's considered contrarian to be interested in facts and evidence rather than to mindlessly support a misguided ideology. The backlash follows increasingly vulgar harassment revelations in Silicon Valley. Several female engineers and entrepreneurs this year named the men they accused of harassing them, and suddenly tech's boys club seemed anything but impervious. Travis Kalanick, Uber's co-founder, resigned as chief executive after the ride-hailing service was embroiled in harassment accusations. Dave McClure, head of the Incubator 500 startups, called himself a creep and stepped down. This month, the chief executive of social finance, Mike Cagney, also quit amid a harassment scandal. So there it is. The backlash follows harassment revelations. Yeah, and I followed dinner with a movie, but dinner didn't cause me to watch a movie. She doesn't say caused, but that's the implication. Although, as I said, she provides absolutely no evidence. In just the last 48 hours, I've spoken to a female tech executive who was grabbed by a male CEO at a large event, and another female executive who was asked to interview at a venture fund because they feel like they need to hire a woman, said Dick Costello, the former chief of Twitter, who now runs the fitness startup Chorus. Well, what does that tell you, Dick? Why would a company feel the need to hire a woman? Could it be they don't want to be shamed for their lack of gender diversity? We should worry about whether the women in tech movement has gone too far sometime after a couple of these aren't regularly happening anymore. And that really reveals the modus operandi here at work. Gender ideologues impatient with the lack of progress in the completely irrelevant metric of gender parity go into an organisation, condemn it as beset by a culture of sexism, and then prescribe the solution, which is, of course, you need to hire more women. It's a jobs for the girls program. Crusader Elizabeth Broderick has used this formula successfully with various Australian government agencies, the Australian Defence Forces, the Australian Federal Police, just to name a couple. The message is the same. You have a sexist culture, and the only way to fix it is to hire more women. And how about this stunning lack of self-awareness? Those leading Silicon Valley's gender equality push said they were astonished that just as the movement was having an impact, it opened up an even more radical men's rights perspective. It's exhausting, said Joel Emerson, who runs Paradigm, a company that designs diversity strategies. It's created divides that I didn't anticipate. So you didn't anticipate that men might get pissed off about blatant discriminatory practices to hire women, not on merit, but because of the shape of their genitalia, despite the plethora of evidence that suggests women are less interested in fields like tech than men. Now, I wonder, does Joel Emerson design diversity strategies to get more men into kindergarten teaching or veterinary school? The truth is, you're the radicals. You're the ones that want to deny the natural diversity of differences that exist between men and women in favour of the manufactured diversity that men and women are the same, and that any differences are the result of social influences, which, as Deborah So pointed out, is laughable. As I've said many times before, an underrepresentation of women in an occupation is not necessarily a sign of discrimination. It would be different if half the IT graduates in the US were female and they only made up 20% of IT workers. Maybe that would be worth looking into, but that's not the case. Women in tech is a non-problem that doesn't need to be addressed, and conflating men's rights and MGTOW, as they do later in this article, to make it sound like objections to radical diversity initiatives are coming from a fringe of women haters in retribution for sexual harassment scandals is not only factually incorrect, but intellectually dishonest. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, or you can support the channel via Patreon, PayPal or on Minds. I'll see you next time.